The town had once been a place of warmth, where families gathered on porches, children played in the streets, and life carried a steady, comforting rhythm. But now it was little more than a hollow shell, its streets barren, its homes locked behind heavy doors. The laughter was gone, replaced by whispers of fear and the quiet hum of a world too afraid to speak. No one dared to walk alone after dark. No one dared to ask questions. And no one, under any circumstances, dared to challenge those who ruled over them with iron fists. For 12-year-old Sophia, this was the only world she had ever known, a town where hope had withered, where people lived not with dreams, but with the barest instinct to survive. She had learned young that there were things one did not speak of, that silence was the price of safety. But knowing and accepting were two different things, and deep in her heart, Sophia refused to accept that this was how life was meant to be. Her father had been one of the few who had dared to stand his ground, a man whose name had once carried respect. He was a truck driver, an honest man who believed that some things were not for sale, not his integrity, not his family's safety, not his soul. When the men in dark jackets came to him, offering money in exchange for silence and cooperation, he had refused. They didn't ask twice. Sophia had been in the kitchen that day when the gunshots rang out. She remembered the way her mother had grabbed her, pressing a trembling hand over her mouth as they crouched behind the counter. "Don't look," her mother had whispered. "Don't make a sound." But even through the walls, even through the sirens that never came, Sophia had known. Her father had been taken from her not by fate, not by accident, but by men who had decided that he was worth more as an example than as a living, breathing person. From that day on, fear was all they had known. Her mother spoke little, her once bright eyes dulled by grief and the unbearable weight of powerlessness. The town, too, had seemed to shrink, its people withdrawing deeper into their silence, into their careful, measured lives of not drawing attention. And Sophia? She had tried to follow the rules, to stay quiet, to blend into the shadows, but the fire inside her refused to die. Sophia sat at the small wooden table in the corner of their dimly lit home, the flickering glow of a kerosene lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The night outside was silent, unnaturally so, as if the town itself had learned to hold its breath in fear. Her mother lay asleep in the next room, exhaustion weighing heavy on her frail frame, but Sophia couldn't sleep, not tonight, not anymore. She had spent too many nights waiting for a change that never came, for someone to stand up, for something to break the endless cycle of fear that wrapped around them like chains. But waiting had done nothing. The people who should have helped had turned their backs. Those who had power had chosen to ignore them. And those who had tried to fight had either disappeared or had been silenced forever. Her small fingers curled around a pencil, her knuckles white with determination. She pulled a single piece of paper toward her and pressed its edges flat. This was reckless, dangerous even. If anyone found out, it could cost her mother everything. But Sophia didn't care. Fear had already stolen too much from them. What more could it take? She hesitated for only a moment before setting the pencil against the paper. "Dear Mr. President," she wrote, her hand steady despite the pounding of her heart. "If you are reading this letter, please help us. My town is no longer a home. The people are afraid, the children have no future, and the streets belong to men who do not care if we live or die. The adults have learned to be silent, but I do not want to be silent anymore. I do not know if this letter will ever reach you, but if no one does anything, nothing will ever change." She paused, staring at the words. They looked too small, too fragile to carry the weight of her world. Would he even read it? Would he even care? She had no way of knowing, but as she looked around the tiny home where she had grown up, a home that now felt like a prison, she knew she had no other choice. She carefully folded the letter, pressing her fingers over the creases as if sealing her last shred of hope within its fragile edges. Tucking it into her jacket, she rose from the table and stepped outside. The night air was cold against her skin, but she ignored the shiver that ran through her. Her path was clear. At the edge of town, near the old gas station, the last bus that still passed through was preparing to leave. Its driver, an older man with kind eyes, was the only person left who dared to cross the borders that trapped the town in its suffocating silence. Sophia approached him, her footsteps light but her resolve heavy. He noticed her immediately, his expression softening. "You shouldn't be out this late," he murmured, concern etched in his features. Sophia pulled the letter from her jacket and held it out to him. "Please," she said, "can you get this to someone who will listen?" The driver looked at the envelope, then back at her, his eyes dark with hesitation. "This is dangerous," he warned. "If they find out." "I know," she interrupted, her voice firm, "but I don't have a choice." For a moment he said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, he reached out and took the letter, slipping it into the pocket of his coat. "I'll do my best," he promised. As the bus rumbled away into the darkness, carrying with it the only hope she had left, Sophia stood alone on the deserted street, staring into the distance. For the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her, something stronger than fear. Hope. The letter had reached its destination, but its true impact was only beginning to unfold. In the heart of Washington, deep within the White House, a decision was about to be made, one that would alter the fate of an entire town. The president sat in the Situation Room, surrounded by his top advisors, military officials, and intelligence experts. Maps were spread across the table, satellite images capturing the small, forsaken town from above. Reports detailing years of unchecked violence, corruption, and fear lay in thick folders, their pages filled with grim statistics that painted a bleak reality. But none of those documents carried the same weight as the letter he had read just hours before. "This is not just another town under siege," the president said, his voice firm. "This is a town that still believes in something greater than fear. If we turn away now, we send a message that we accept this as the new reality. I refuse to do that." The room remained silent. No one doubted his conviction, but the risks were undeniable. One of his national security advisors leaned forward. "Sir, with all due respect, we need to think this through carefully. We're not just dealing with local criminals. Intelligence suggests this town is part of a much larger network, one with influence beyond our borders." The head of Homeland Security nodded grimly. "There are officials in that region who have been bought. If we intervene without a solid strategy, we may face resistance, not just from the gangs, but from people inside the system itself." The president exhaled, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the table. He understood the complexity of the situation, but he also knew one simple truth. They could not afford to stand by. "Then we do this right," he said. "We don't just send in law enforcement, we dismantle this system from the inside out." A three-phase operation was quickly devised. First, a covert intelligence team would be deployed immediately. Their mission: gather first-hand information, identify key players in the criminal network, and confirm the extent of corruption among local officials. Second, a specialized federal task force would prepare to move in with precision. Their goal was not only to neutralize the immediate threats, but to secure the town's safety in the long term. Third, a reconstruction effort would be launched in tandem with the operation. Federal resources would be allocated for rebuilding infrastructure, restoring schools, and ensuring the town's economy could be revived once security was re-established. This would not be a temporary fix. It would be the beginning of a lasting change. The president's tone was resolute. "We do not just liberate this town. We give them a future." The operation began within hours. As federal agents slipped into the town undercover, they quickly realized the situation was even worse than the reports had suggested. The people lived in constant fear, avoiding eye contact with outsiders, their shoulders hunched with the weight of silent suffering. The gang that controlled the town was not just a band of criminals, it was an institution. Their network extended far beyond street-level violence, embedding itself in smuggling routes, corrupt business dealings, and political influence. A coded message was sent back to Washington. The town is more than occupied, it is owned. When the president received the update, his expression darkened. He turned to his advisors. "We were right to act. And now we don't just fight for one town, we fight to take back what was stolen from all of them." The mission had shifted from intervention to revolution. The weight of history had been set in motion, and at the heart of it all, a young girl's voice had been heard. The plan was in motion. The decision had been made, and now the execution had to be flawless. From Washington to the outskirts of the forgotten town, a silent war was about to unfold, one that would determine not just the fate of Sophia and her mother, but the survival of an entire community. Under the cover of night, unmarked vehicles rolled through desolate highways, carrying highly trained operatives from multiple federal agencies. This wasn't just about sending in brute force. It was a carefully orchestrated mission designed to dismantle the criminal empire from the inside. The intelligence team had already infiltrated, mapping out the gang's strongholds, tracking their movements, and pinpointing the corrupt officials who had turned a blind eye for too long. In a secure command center, federal agents monitored every detail through hidden cameras and intercepted communications. A lead operative's voice crackled through the radio. Target locations confirmed, hostages sighted, we're moving in. For Sophia, the night felt heavier than usual. She sat in the dimly lit room of her small home, staring at the window, her heart pounding with an unshakable feeling something was coming. The fear had never left her town, but tonight it felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves knew that change was about to crash through the silence. Then, without warning, the streets erupted. Explosions tore through the night as precise charges disabled key gang checkpoints, severing their communication lines. The once untouchable stronghold of fear was suddenly vulnerable. The gang members scrambled, their false sense of invincibility shattered in an instant. A tactical unit breached the warehouse where hostages, including Sophia's mother, had been held captive. The operatives moved like ghosts, eliminating threats with quiet efficiency. In a back room, her mother trembled, the bruises on her wrists evidence of the suffering she had endured. When the door burst open and a federal agent entered, she recoiled at first, until she heard the words she had been praying for. "We're here to take you home." Meanwhile, on the outskirts of town, the gang's leader, Rahman, tried to escape, but every road was blocked, every alley patrolled. The walls were closing in. He barked orders into a satellite phone, demanding help that would never come. The reign of terror he had built was collapsing beneath him. Sophia, unaware of the precise details of the mission, clutched her hands together and whispered a prayer. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she knew something was changing. By dawn, the town was no longer under siege. The streets were lined with military personnel and government officials, not as conquerors, but as liberators. Sophia stood at the threshold of her home, watching as the first rays of sunlight illuminated a town that, for the first time in years, could breathe. The battle was over. But the real fight, rebuilding what had been lost, was just beginning. The town had barely begun to breathe again when the storm returned. The remnants of the gang, those who had slipped through the cracks of the federal operation, refused to fade into the shadows. Their empire had crumbled, their leader captured, but desperation had made them reckless. And nothing was more dangerous than men with nothing left to lose. The night was eerily silent when they came. Sophia sat beside her mother, wrapped in a blanket, exhaustion pressing down on them both. The past hours had been a whirlwind, federal agents swarming the streets, people crying tears of relief, neighbors who had once hidden in fear stepping out to embrace the new dawn. But the fear in her mother's eyes had not faded. She knew the battle wasn't truly over. And then, just before midnight, the silence shattered. The front door exploded inward, splinters flying as masked men stormed in. Sophia barely had time to react before rough hands grabbed her mother, wrenching her from the chair. "No!" Sophia screamed, lunging forward, but an arm yanked her back, pinning her against the wall. Her mother's eyes locked onto hers, wild with terror. "Run, Sophia!" she cried, struggling against her captors. The men didn't waste time. They weren't here for Sophia. They were here to send a message. One of them, his face hidden beneath a scarf, hissed through clenched teeth. "You thought we were finished? This is just the beginning." With that, they dragged her mother out into the night. The roar of an engine, the screech of tires against broken pavement, and then nothing. Sophia collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls of her home, once a fragile sanctuary, now felt like a prison. She should have been scared. She should have been paralyzed by the weight of it all. But she wasn't. She clenched her fists, wiping away the tears burning down her cheeks. She had lost her father. She would not lose her mother. Sophia took a deep breath, forcing herself to stand. She wasn't a helpless child anymore. She had sent a letter that had moved the most powerful man in the country. She had watched an entire town rise from the ashes. She would not be silent. With newfound resolve, she ran into the night, toward the only people who could help. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Sophia ran through the darkened streets, her heart pounding with determination. The town that had once been frozen in fear was now stirring with resistance. But time was slipping away. Her mother was in danger, and she refused to let history repeat itself. She had already lost her father, she would not lose her mother too. Reaching the temporary base where federal agents coordinated their operation, she burst through the doors, breathless but resolute. "I know where they'll take her," she declared, her voice steadier than she expected. The room fell silent. A lead agent, a hardened man who had seen too much loss, studied the fire in her eyes. "How do you know?" he asked cautiously. Sophia's hands clenched into fists. "My father was a truck driver. He knew every road, every hidden path. Before he was taken, he told me about places they used for shipments, places the authorities never checked." She knelt beside a map spread across the table, her small fingers tracing familiar routes. "This one," she pointed. "It's far enough to hide, but close enough for a quick escape." The agent hesitated only for a second before nodding. Orders were given. Vehicles roared to life. Armed teams moved with precision. As the convoy sped toward the abandoned warehouse, Sophia sat in the back of a black SUV, gripping the edge of her seat. She wasn't just a girl who had written a letter anymore. She was part of this fight. And when the sun rose, she would bring her mother home. The sun rose over the town, casting a golden glow on streets that had once been gripped by fear. The echoes of gunfire were gone, replaced by the sound of voices strong, determined, and full of life. For the first time in years, doors were open and people stepped outside, not in fear, but in hope. Sophia stood in the town square, watching as workers unloaded crates of supplies, while volunteers worked side by side, clearing debris and repainting old, shattered buildings. The scars of the past remained, but the town had chosen not to be defined by them. A man who had once lived in silence approached Sophia, his hands rough from years of labor. "We thought we had no choice but to live in fear," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you reminded us that we still had power." She smiled, glancing around at the faces of people who had once felt powerless but now stood tall. Her mother, standing beside her, squeezed her hand. "This isn't just about rebuilding walls," she said softly. "It's about rebuilding trust." From the steps of the town hall, a federal officer addressed the crowd. "This town survived because of its people. Now it will thrive because of them." Cheers erupted. In that moment, Sophia knew their fight hadn't just been about survival. It had been about reclaiming a future. And they had won. The town square, once a place of fear and silence, was now alive with anticipation. People gathered, their eyes filled with something they had not dared to feel in years' pride. They had rebuilt not just their homes, but their spirit. And today, the world would see it. A low hum filled the air as a helicopter descended, kicking up dust as it landed near the newly restored community center. The door opened, and the president stepped out, his gaze sweeping across the town that had once been forgotten. But it was not the buildings or the fresh coats of paint that caught his attention, it was the people standing together, unbroken. He approached Sophia, who stood at the heart of it all, her mother at her side. There was no grand speech, no rehearsed words, just a simple moment between a leader and the child who had dared to demand change. "You reminded us all," he said, his voice steady, "that courage doesn't come from power. It comes from refusing to accept that things can't change." The crowd erupted into applause, not just for Sophia, but for themselves. They had proven that no place was beyond saving, that even in the darkest times, a single voice could ignite a revolution. And so the town that had once been ruled by fear became a symbol of resilience. A place that did not just survive, but chose to rewrite its own destiny. As the sun set over the town, its golden light bathed the streets that had once been filled with fear. Now they echoed with laughter, resilience, and the undeniable proof that change was possible. What had started as a desperate plea, a single letter written by a brave 12-year-old girl, had become the catalyst for something far greater. Sophia's words had not just reached the president, They had awakened a nation, reminding everyone that even the smallest voice could shatter the strongest silence. Her story is proof that one act of courage, no matter how small, can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. A single letter did not just save a town, it inspired people to believe in something they had long forgotten: hope. Now the question remains, what would happen if we all dared to act? If we refused to accept things as they were and instead chose to fight for what they could be? If this story touched your heart, comment 1. If you believe it could be improved, comment 2. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience and hope, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.